And there we go. Okay, so we're going to be studying this Hassidic discourse. Now, let me just explain what a Hassidic discourse is and how it works. A discourse is said on sometimes on mostly on formal occasions, and it's not said as a sort of a lesson as such. It's said more sort of as a revelation, if I may be so bold as to use that expression. Sometimes they were written, but mostly they were said, and they were said sort of as a stream of consciousness, although most, they're called memorim, in other words, discourses. Most of these discourses are very, very well structured and very, very carefully structured and very, very informative. It's not a stream of consciousness thing in the sense that things are disconnected. Things are generally very connected, but the purpose of them is when the person who is uttering the discourse, the Chassidic rabbi, the grand rabbi, or as we call him, the Rebbe, when he says this discourse, he's in a different world altogether. Very often with his eyes closed, and you can see. Actually, I maybe should have stored a video to show you guys. But in any event, whatever the situation is, you can see sort of this glow on their faces when the Rebbes would say a Hasidic discourse. And what they were essentially doing was bringing down what they were talking about. They were bringing it down into reality, bringing it down to this world. Whether it will be revealed now or be revealed later is another issue, but it certainly is, in a sense, an instance of divine revelation. Okay, so this particular discourse was said in the year 1951, which in the Hebrew calendar is 5711. 1951. That was the year after the passing of the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Rebbe is Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak was the head of the Hassidic dynasty called Lubavitch. Lubavitch or Chabad, we might have heard them as Chabad. And they are probably, Chabad Hasidim are probably the most involved in the study of the Baal Shem Tov's teachings in depth. In other words, to a certain extent, it's an amalgamation of the teachings of the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, the famous father of modern Kabbalah, essentially, and the Baal Shem Tov, or according to the Baal Shem Tov's principles. And therefore, certainly the most prolific of writers. There's hundreds and hundreds of volumes of their works. And there were 6 generations. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe passed away in 1950, and his son-in-law, he had 2 sons-in-law. He only had daughters, he never had sons. So his 2 sons-in-law both did not want to take upon the leadership of that particular dynasty. They didn't want to take it on, but eventually, after a year, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, known as Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Rebbe to us, did take over the leadership, and this was the first official discourse that he delivered. He had delivered many discourses up until that time, but unofficially, so to speak. This was the first official discourse. And he based it on the discourse of his father-in-law, the last discourse that his father-in-law wrote. Now, his father-in-law had had a stroke, and therefore he was not able to speak clearly. So he wrote this discourse, and this discourse was called Basi LeGani, or I Have Come to My Garden. What is it talking about? It's talking essentially about the building of the first temple by King Solomon. As you probably know, there was a tabernacle built in the desert by Moses, which lasted for 400 years approximately. And eventually, King Solomon was given permission, not King David, who wanted to build um, the temple, the permanent temple in Jerusalem, but rather to his son, King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, who was given permission to actually build the temple. After he built the temple, he wrote one of the poems, or one of the pieces of literature that he wrote was the famous Song of Songs, the Song of Songs. And this verse that we're going to study is from the Song of Songs. Now, why is it called the Song of Songs? Because it's the highest of all songs. It reveals the deepest secrets of the Torah, if you know how to unpack them. And also, there are those that explain that it's called the Song of Songs because it's the song that every other song sings. In other words, it's the inner dimension of song, the inner and higher dimension of song. And that was composed as a song for the completion of the building of the temple in Jerusalem. Okay, so let's start the discourse. This is chapter 1. I copied and sent you chapters 1 and 2. I think there's 11 chapters, if I'm not mistaken. Some of them longer, some of them shorter, but 11 chapters. Let's see what it says. My father-in-law, the Rebbe, blessed memory, that's the Rebbe talking about his father-in-law who passed away the year before, writes as follows in the Maimon, in the discourse that he released for the day of his passing, the 10th of Shvat, the 10th of the month of Shvat. Shvat generally corresponds approximately to sometime in January, usually. So the 10th of Shvat, 5710, 1950. And it begins as follows. I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. This is the Almighty talking. And he says to his bride, who is his bride, we'll see shortly. But he says, I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. Now, obviously, we all know that your sister cannot be your bride. So what does this mean over here? Well, it simply means that there are different types of relationships. There's a relationship of brother and sister. There's a relationship of husband and wife. There's a relationship of parent and child. There's a relationship of siblings between one another. Yeah, my sister and my brother and so on and so forth. In the relationship of friends, all different kinds of relationships. And each relationship has a special quality to it. The relationship of a brother and sister, ideally, and it may not be like this in every family, but the ideal relationship of a brother and sister is a very close bond of love between them. And that is by virtue of their birth. They were sort of born into the same family, born into the same circumstances, more or less. And therefore, they have experienced in their youth, gone through the same, more or less the same experiences in that family. And therefore, there's a very close relationship between them because they share experience. They share a family and so on. Whereas a bride is someone you marry later on in life, after your youth or at the end of your youth. Some people get married earlier, some later, obviously, but nevertheless, for the first 18, 19, 20 years of a person's life or more, you didn't spend it with your spouse, your bride or your groom. Now, who's the bride, who's the groom? There are different explanations, but essentially the groom is the Almighty God, and the bride is the soul. So, God says, I have come into my garden. What's my garden? The garden is the Garden of Eden, which is the temple. I'm coming to my garden, my sister, my bride. I have come into my garden. What does that mean? Essentially, that means that is a revelation of godliness on the highest level of this world. My garden, right? Which is where the temple was. And therefore, the relationships of sister and bride now will apply. And we'll see later on how this is explained. So the Midrash is rabbinic literature which uses a lot of analogies and stories and metaphors for things. It's not meant to be taken literally always, but this particular Midrash says as follows. Midrash Rabbah on this verse observes that the word used is not legan, I have come to the garden, but rather legani, to my garden. And this implies leganuni. Legan, legani implies to lignuni. Lignuni means the place where I get married. He translates it here as my bridal chamber. I would have translated it better as to the marriage canopy. I get married under under a marriage canopy, so to speak, and that is what the temple was supposed to be, the marriage canopy of God and the soul. So he explains it, and he says as follows. Does everyone have a copy with them? I'm sorry, I should have answered this before. If you don't have a copy, I can share my copy and you'll be able to see it on the screen. Sorry about that, I should have mentioned it before. Okay, so this is where it started. I've come to my garden, my sister, my bride, etc. So we said it implies lignuni, to the marriage canopy, to under the marriage canopy. So the divine presence is thus saying, I have come into my bridal chamber, into the place in which my essence was originally revealed. Now, what does that mean, the place where my essence was originally revealed? That means that godliness was initially, when the world was first created, godliness was revealed in this physical plane. Godliness was revealed on this physical plane. Where was it revealed? It was revealed in the Garden of Eden, right? In the Garden of Eden, there was the divine presence was revealed to Adam and to Adam and Eve. But basically, the divine presence was revealed in this world, and then he's going to explain what happened, why it's no longer revealed over here, it's concealed. The Midrash continues, this rabbinic literature continues and explains, for the essence of the Shechinah, the essence of the divine presence, Shechinah means the indwelling divine presence, was originally apparent in this lowly world. Godliness could be discerned here in this world. So, what happened? Let us understand why the Midrash uses the expression, the essence of the Shechinah, the essence of the divine presence. Discussing the meaning of the level of divinity termed Shechinah, the divine presence, the Alter Rebbe was the first Rebbe of Chabad. His name is Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. He lived in the time of Napoleon. And he actually had quite a run-in with Napoleon. In fact, he was very much opposed to Napoleon, and the reason he was opposed to him was because he felt that Napoleon was, with liberty, equality, and fraternity, Napoleon was introducing into the world the concept of throwing off the yoke of heaven. Essentially, that liberty didn't mean liberty from rulers, although it meant that to a certain extent as well. It also meant liberty from the hands of heaven, liberty from the yoke of heaven, so to speak. So he opposed him, and Napoleon actually tried to capture him and was not successful. In any event, so he's known as the Alter Rebbe, or the Old Rebbe, literally. He explains that the divine presence is thus named because it dwells and is enclosed in all worlds, not just in this lowest world, but in all of the worlds. As in the scriptural phrase, "V'shechanti b'tocham," I will dwell within them. In scripture, it says as follows in the section called Truma. God says to Moses to build a temple, to build a tabernacle rather, and asuli migdash, make for me a temple, v'shachanti b'tocham, and I will dwell not in it, but amongst them, within them. I will dwell within them. I will dwell within the heart and the soul of every person that opens himself up to such a thing. So, as in the scriptural phrase, v'shachanti b'tocham, I will dwell within them. For the Shechinah, the divine presence, is the initial revelation of the infinite Ein Sof light. The Shechinah, concept of Shechinah usually is usually only understood as applying to the divine presence in this, in the lowest world. However, what he's explaining over here is that the Shechinah, the concept of Shechinah, is relevant in all of the worlds, all the way through, all the way up to the infinite Ein Sof, the Or Ein Sof. Now, what's the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light? There's God himself, and then there's his revelation of himself to himself, so to speak. That's called the Or Ein Sof, the infinite light. His revelation of himself to himself. Why does he reveal himself to himself, so to speak? In order that he'll be able to reveal that level later on in the creation of the worlds. Now, this is analogous to the idea of, let's say you want to communicate something to other people. So usually before you communicate a very important message, you're going to sit there and think about how exactly you're going to say it. So as you're thinking about how you're going to say what you're going to say, that's analogous to the idea of the revealing your thoughts to yourself, revealing your intentions, your plans to yourself. In a sense, revealing yourself to yourself. So that's the paradigm for the Or Ein Sof. The Or Ein Sof, so to speak, the infinite light, is the revelation that will be in a measured and limited way in the future, is placed into reality. I see there's something in the chat. Let me see, where's my chat box now? It disappeared. Can't see the chat. It seems to have disappeared. Oh, here it is. Okay, it's behind another window. See that the Shechinah being allowed to receive and revealing status that relates to the divine. So the Shechinah present at all levels, not as intrinsically different being, but as a particular agency or ability in the divine. Exactly. Yes, that is correct. Ernest asks, what is Almighty's existence prior to revealing himself to himself? It's only him to himself. That's all. Before, it's only, and which remains true right now as well. And Od Milvado, there's nothing besides him. The Almighty's existence prior to revealing himself to himself was before there was even a thought of creating a world. He was what he was to himself, but without thinking about himself as he's going to be presenting himself later on, so to speak. Good question. Okay. So he continues and he says as follows. From the Alter Rebbe's statement, from the first Chabad Rebbe's statement, that the initial revelation of the infinite Ein Sof light is called the Shechinah, we can understand that the Shechinah transcends by far even the loftiest of the four worlds, the world of Atzilut or Atzilus. So as we know, there are four worlds. There's three immanent worlds and one transcendent world. The three immanent worlds are called Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. And the world of Atzilut is a transcendent world. But Atzilut is nevertheless a world. If I say it Atzilut or Atzilus, it's the same thing. It's just different pronunciations. One is more of an Israeli type pronunciation. And the other one is more traditional Hassidic pronunciation, Atzilus, other than Atzilus, same thing. Okay, so there are the four worlds, Atzilus or Atzilut, the transcendent world, and three immanent worlds, but they're all worlds. Even the world of Atzilus is a world. Now, the word world in Hebrew is olam. Olam means world. And the word olam comes from the word he'elem, concealment. So a world is a concealment of divinity. It's a revelation to a certain extent, but it's a revelation of limited godliness. It's a revelation of limited godliness, and therefore it is, in that sense, a concealment as well. Because if it's only a limited revelation, then it's concealing the primary essence of the divine presence, which is infinite. Finite revelation conceals the infinity thereof. Okay, so what he's saying is as follows. The Shechinah transcends even the loftiest of those four worlds. In other words, the Shechinah is not a world. The Shechinah, the divine presence, transcends all of the worlds. And that Shechinah is to be found, he continues, and that Shechinah is to be found even in the divine light that precedes the initial self-imposed contraction of divine revelation that is known as the Tzimtzum. So the Shechinah, the divine presence, precedes the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum is that contraction. Let me just explain the concept of the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum is a contraction of godliness in order that there can be a finite world. God, so to speak, conceals his infinity so that a finite world can exist, and that's called the Tzimtzum, the self-limitation. It's actually self-limitation is the wrong word. It's the limitation of the light, not the self. It's the limitation of his light, of his revelation, in order for there to be a finite world. Because when the infinite is revealed, when the infinite light is revealed, finite existence cannot be. There can be no finite existence in the presence of the infinite. Everything gets obliterated into infinity, so to speak, when there's there. Therefore, we have what's called the tzimtzum, the contraction, so that the revelation can allow a finite existence to come into being. That self-imposed contraction of divine revelation, that's the tzimtzum. For revelation first occurs in the infinite Ein Sof light, the infinite or Ein Sof, that precedes, that comes before the tzimtzum, before this contraction, the self-imposed contraction. As the Mittler Rebbe writes, the Mittler Rebbe was the second Rebbe of Chabad. Now, what he does over here and right throughout this discourse is he weaves together the discourse out of the teachings of all the previous six rabbis, the six rebbes that preceded him. So he started off with the first one, now he's going to the second one, then he'll do the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one, the sixth one, and then that weaving it all together brings the entire chain of revelation of the rebbes of Chabad into a cohesive system, as we'll see. So as the Mittler Rebbe writes, that was the second Rebbe, the luminescence of the Kav and the Chut. And now I have to explain this. He explains it over here. Let me just read what he says here and then I'll explain a bit more. I.e. the narrow band of divine illumination that shone forth following the Tzimtzum. So the luminescence of the Kav and the Chut in relation to the essence of the Ein Sof light is termed Shechinah. That itself is termed Shechinah. Now, let me just explain what's going on over here. There's first the infinite light of the Or Ein Sof, which God contracts and conceals. Conceals in order that a finite world can come into being. Then, out of that infinite light comes a line of light or a band of light, as he calls it over here, a narrow band of divine illumination that is the source and the origin of all of the creation that follows. Now, since it's the source of creation, it is already considered to be Shechinah. Shechinah is the indwelling presence. So compared with the light that is infinite, this narrow band, so to speak, this narrow band of light is already called the Shechinah. So we see that Shechinah goes back all the way to the very, very highest level. There's a question, is the intention of Almighty design, as being spoken here, to allow souls to gain experience, so those souls can later contribute to the Ein Sof once the souls return from this lower world? I don't know if you can say they can contribute to the Ein Sof. The contribution of souls is actually not after death. The contribution of souls is to reveal godliness in life, in this life. as you probably are aware by now, Jewish thought is very much focused on doing what you can in this world and not leaving it all for the next world. The next world is a world in which the soul is limited to the revelation of its own good deeds, its own righteousness and holiness that it managed to achieve in this world. So whatever that level of holiness that we achieved in this world will be actually revealed in the world to come. But that's not the purpose of our being in the world. The purpose of our being in the world is to make the world a godly place, a place where godliness can be revealed. In other words, as he's explaining now, to build a temple in this world. The intention is to build a temple in this world, to build a temple not as a physical structure, but as a structure in our own hearts. That's why it says, I shall dwell among them. Within each person is the possibility of building a temple. Now, how that goes, how we do that, he's going to explain. So let's see how he continues here. So what did we just say? We just said that although generally the term Shechinah is meant for the lower levels of godliness that are manifested and that can be manifested in this world, nevertheless, the term Shechinah also refers to the very, very, very highest level of revelation, which is called the Kav. The Kav, compared with the Or Ein Sof, this line of light compared with the infinite light, is also called Shechinah. Okay? So, for the meaning of the term Shechinah varies according to the spiritual level of its context. According to the context, so the certain aspect of the revelation in that context would be called a Shechinah. In relation to Atzilus, for example, it is Malchus, the Sphira of Malchus, the lowest of the 10 Sphirot, literally sovereignty of the lowest of the supernal Sphirot, that is termed Shechinah. So the Shechinah of Atzilus, of the world of Atzilut, is Malchus. That's Sphira of Malchut. Even with regard to the use of this term, the Tzemach Tzedek, that is the third Lubavitcher Rebbe. Now I said he went to the Alter Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe, now the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was named the Tzemach Tzedek after one of the works, the book, and one of the books that he wrote. He called it Tzemach Tzedek. So the Tzemach Tzedek explains that it applies only when Malchus becomes the level of Atik. Now this is a complicated concept. Let's just finish the paragraph. This term Shechinah only applies when Malchus, the lowest sphere, becomes the level of Atik, i.e. when it serves as the fountainhead for the world of Bria. When is Malchus called the Shechinah? Not when it's in Atzilus, but when it's in the transition mode from Atzilut to the next world down, to the world of Bria. Then it can be called Shechinah. And what's the transition from Malchus of Atzilus to Bria? It goes to the Keter, to the highest Sphira called Keter of the world of Bria. And the inner dimension of the world of the Sphira of Keter is called Atik, the Ancient of Days, Atik Yoimin, or simply Atik, Atik being a higher level than Atik Yoimin. But anyway, it's a level in Keter. It's one of the levels in Keter. So when Malchus of Atzilus becomes Atik of Bria, then it's called Shechinah. However, as he explains further, however, when Malchus is still in Atzilus, if it's still in the world of Atzilus, it is united with them, i.e. with all the upper Sphirot of the world of Atzilus, and the term Shechinah cannot be applied to it. So when is the Shechinah called the Shechinah? Was in a state of transition to the lower world. So, nevertheless, this does not contradict the earlier statement that even so lofty a level as the Kav, which is spiritually superior by far to Atzilus, is termed Shechinah. It's not a contradiction to that, and he'll explain why. For the term Shechinah is used by our sages, as used by our sages, refers to the level of Malchus of Atzilus. Generally, the word Shechinah refers to the level of Malchus of Atzilus, and then, even then, only insofar as it becomes the level of Atik for the world of Bria. as we just said. In its source, however, i.e. in the state in which it exists in relation to the Ein Sof light, to the Or Ein Sof, even the Kav is termed Shechinah. Okay, let's just stop for a minute and see where we are. We started off by saying that when King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, built the temple in Jerusalem, when it was fully built and the divine presence rested within it, on top of the ark between one second, just let me, 1 second here. Okay. Yeah, so when the divine presence rested on top of the ark, then King Solomon actually composed a song where he said, I have come, in the name of God, I have come to my garden, my sister, my bride. I have come to my garden. My divine presence now rests in the world. When it says that my divine presence, what is exactly is it talking about? It could be talking about simply the level of Malchus of Asiya, of the lowest world. But in fact, it's talking about Malchus of all of the worlds. All of the worlds and beyond all of the worlds. It's in fact talking about the level of the Kav as it's about to be revealed. As he just said, in its source, however, in the state in which it exists in relation to the Ein Sof light, to the Or Ein Sof, even the Kav is termed Shechinah, because it's the beginning of the revelation. Okay, let's continue. Continue a little bit further. I don't know if we're going to finish this chapter today, but let's see. Okay, we will see. All right, so the Rebbe Maharash is now the fourth Rebbe of 7. The Rebbe Maharash writes that one of the reasons why the Kav is called Shechinah in relation to the Ein Sof light, to the Or Ein Sof, is that the Kav is drawn down in order to become enclosed in the world and in Jewish souls. It's brought down to be clothed in the world and in souls. In other words, the whole purpose of the divine presence is to be revealed, to be revealed in the world and to be revealed in the soul. Now, why particularly does he say here in Jewish souls? Because we built the tabernacle, we built the temple, and that's where it was revealed. Through the temple, it was revealed in the soul of people. It's not exclusive to Jews. There are many. A person is called righteous according to his deeds, not according to his birth certificate. And therefore, a righteous person, for example, Noah was in fact a righteous person. He was the first one to be called a tzaddik in the Torah. Tzaddik meaning a righteous person. Noach ish tzaddik, tamim haya b'dorotav. He was a tzaddik. He was a righteous person, and pure in his generation, perfect in his generation. So with the Shechinah, when it comes to rest in the worlds and in souls, it is therefore termed Shechinah even at its outset. In other words, at the very, very top of the chain, when it's about to be manifested downwards and downwards and downwards, even that very top manifestation is called Shechinah. Okay. We're going a little bit further. We're now getting to the 5th Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Rebbe Rashab explains that on an even higher level, the first source of Shechinah, in fact, precedes the Tzimtzum. I think we're going to leave this for next week. This is a complicated subject. For the revelation of divine life prior to the Tzimtzum is termed Shechinah. All right, I think I'll leave that till next week. It's complicated. I have to explain why even before the Tzimtzum it's called Shechinah. But since it's a rather long explanation, I think we'll leave it till next week. Are there any questions so far? You could type your questions in the, Kav is like a cylinder from above to below, right? If it is something that's too complicated, I can choose a simpler one. It's a more straightforward one. This is a pretty complicated. It's a technical mimer. A lot of mimerim are not so technical. The one that it's based on is not nearly as technical as this one. I thought I'd try the technical side and see how it goes, because there's a lot to talk about. But if everybody or the majority of you feel it's too technical, we can certainly go to something lighter. This was just a trial. Okay. All right, so far we're good. But you can certainly write to me privately. You know the address, kabballahdecoded@gmail.com, kabballahdecoded@gmail.com. You can write to me and tell me if you think, you can write anonymously also, it doesn't matter. And just tell me you think it's too much and it's not gonna work for us or whatever. And what I will do is, I will probably send out, well, let me do it right now. I'll just put it in the chat over here. You can copy it from the chat if you want. The source of this, it's a printed article that you can access the whole discourse. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so you might want to review the whole thing over there. Good, okay. If you feel that it's worth continuing, just let me know, and we'll continue with that hopefully next week. Although, as I mentioned before, I may be trotting off to New York for the birth of my daughter's baby. If everything goes well, it might be this week, might be next week. I don't know. We don't know when it's going to be exactly. So I may not be here next week, but I'll let you know. Hopefully in time. I know this email came in very late, so it was a busy day. Okay. All right, folks. Thank you. Thank you very much. Address the virus. Okay. The virus is coming from a place that we don't really understand. The word corona in Hebrew, the word corona in I think it's originally Greek or Latin or something. It's either Greek or Latin, I'm not sure. The word corona really means it's from the word crown. Maybe I won't be going to New York. I hope I will. It's from the word crown. In other words, this is a disease that's coming from a level that's not understood. It's not understood why it's happening and so on and so forth. I did do an analysis of it, and I can tell you that the origin of it is not a good thing. My suspicion, when I do name analyses, as you probably know by now. So in the analysis I did, the name corona, the way it's spelled in Hebrew, it came out that it had to do with a verse which expressed a very negative view about certain things. And the analysis came out that it was probably caused, or very possibly had something to do with, the idea of the consumption. There are two ideas: the consumption of human flesh, which, I hate to say it like this, but in China, it's not an unknown phenomenon that people eat human flesh over there. It's not unknown. There's a few magazine articles about it that I found. I was personally shocked, so I went to check if this is true, and apparently it is. But even more so, there are a lot of, in China, because of the one-child policy, there are a lot of abortions that happen in China because culturally they want boys, they don't want girls, whatever, I don't know. Let's not get into this political issue, but human flesh, apparently the aborted babies are fed. It could be that it goes into the human food supply chain, or it certainly goes into the animal food supply chain. And they're feeding animals, and I'm not talking about animals that are necessarily carnivorous animals, because carnivorous animals eat flesh, and that, you know, that's okay. But they kind of it apparently goes into the feed of like dairy, into dairy feed, goes into dairy feed, so it's mixing with all kinds of other things and grains and so on. And again, this is only a suspicion, and that's the way it comes out by analysis. I'm not saying that is necessarily the case, but it seems from what from the various analyses that I did, that this is one of the possible sources coming from, and that's why it's so contagious to human beings, because its origin is using human flesh as animal feed. That's one possibility. The other one is that it comes from licentious acts with animals, which is apparently also something which is not unknown in China. In fact, it is apparently, I wouldn't say common, but it's not unusual. Let's put it that way. Yeah. So that is what the origin of it is. Possibly there are other theories about it. I mean, there's one of the theories is that you know, it came from a lab where they test certain viruses, human genetically modified viruses, on animals, and either some of the virus got out of the lab, or as one person speculated, one person who has some knowledge of the situation speculated, they sold one of the animals that they'd experimented on. They sold it for you know, to the local meat market or whatever, and went into the food supply, the food chain. So that could also be, I don't know, but yeah, they are. Animal cruelty is not. I did write it up. I'm kind of hesitant to put it out in public so much. I mean, if you want it, write it to. I don't want to just sort of post it everywhere, you know. If you want it, you know, write to me and I'll send you a copy. But again, I'm not saying this definitively. This is just the way it seems to have come out in my analysis, which may or may not be correct. So just be aware that it's not necessarily the case, but there's a reasonable suspicion that this is and that's why human beings are so devastated by it. It's, you know, it spreads very, very rapidly. And anyway, the main thing to do, or the question is not where it comes from, the question is what to do about it. The main thing to do is not to panic, because panic is what causes more deaths than anything else. There's no need to panic. Just keep calm, wash your hands often, eat, make sure you wash your food, you know, your fruits and vegetables, and cook your meat and your fish properly, and just carry on with your life. Most of the people that get it are not seriously affected by it. Some older people are more seriously affected by it, and there have been some deaths, but they usually with people with compromised immune systems or compromised respiratory systems. So I don't think there's anything to panic about. There's certainly nothing to panic about. It's not like you know, the polio virus and things like that were much more widespread and much more dangerous at that time. The measles virus, it's a virus. It affects a lot of people. Don't worry about it too much. Even if it does, God forbid, come to you, it's for most people like a bad cold or like a flu, and don't worry about it. This too shall pass. Alrighty. Wendy says, good to keep the body's pH nice and alkaline. Water with lemon and lime. Drink daily and enjoy. Thank you. Good advice. They say vitamin D3, vitamin C, you know, just eat healthy, live your life as normal, wash your hands more than you usually do, and everything should be fine. God willing. Okay. All right, folks, we'll leave it at that. And See you again next week, hopefully. And hopefully everybody will be well and hale and hearty. All the best.